Okay, well, it's just turned 7:30, and so I'd like to very warmly welcome you all to this evening's event. My name is Zoe Toft, and I'm chair of FOLIO Sutton Coldfield. FOLIO is a small charity, and it supports the public libraries here in Sutton Coldfield. In pre-COVID times, we would be putting on events in the libraries, primarily in Sutton Coldfield Library, to encourage footfall to the library. Obviously, we've had to slightly reinvent ourselves given the current circumstances, but pre-COVID, we certainly put on a lot of local history events in the library, and tonight's event, our talk on the history of Holy Trinity, is the first of a series running through till about mid-May, early June, on a wide variety of aspects of Sutton's history and related issues around Sutton. So we're really delighted to welcome you this evening. I would just like to very quickly say a couple of thank yous. So behind the scenes, you won't be able to see her this evening. I'm ably assisted by one of my fellow trustees, Liz. She'll be helping deal with any technical problems that hopefully we won't have. I'd also like to say a very sincere thank you to the Rotary Club of Wild Green, who have supported us with our Zoom feature this evening and for the whole series of talks. They've enabled us to have a greater capacity to ensure that everybody who wishes to attend is able to join us. So a really very big thank you to the Rotary Club of Wild Green. A tiny little bit of housekeeping. Obviously, we're on Zoom this evening. Well done for making it here. I'm sure many of you are quite fed up with Zoom, probably. This evening's Zoom version, however, might be a little bit different to what you're used to, because we're using the webinar function rather than the meeting function. And that means that whilst you can see me and our speaker, Stella, at the moment, you are not on screen and your audio isn't turned on. However, we definitely want to hear from you this evening, and the way to get in touch with us, either because you need to let us know about a problem or because you want to submit a question to Stella, is to look for the Q&A function. So depending on what sort of device you're on, somewhere you'll find a little Q&A button. It will be about where the chat function normally is on whatever device you're on. And that's the way to submit a question, either a question to me or Liz to let us know about a problem, or at any point during the talk to submit a question to Stella. Stella won't be answering the questions in the talk. We're going to save them all up to the end when we will, I can see somebody's raised a hand. Peter, this is a bit new technology for me, so I guess you're going to ask a question. Maybe you could just submit it via the Q&A just so that I can find out what you'd like to ask us about. What I was going to say about the questions is we're going to save them all to the end, and I'll answer, or Stella will answer as many as possible in the time that we have. If we run out of time, because I do want to keep this just to an hour, just to keep us all from our brains frying, Stella's very kindly offered to answer any of them afterwards via email. So we'll keep a register of those questions and make sure Stella gets them. So that's questions so those are questions from you to us. I also need to let you know we're trying out something brand new this evening with the technology that we've not done before. When you leave this evening's webinar, you will hopefully, if you stay online just for a couple of minutes afterwards, we'd really appreciate it if you would answer a very brief survey that we've sent that should appear as if by magic. At least that's how it's worked in testing. Basically just ask you for a little bit about feedback about this evening, because this is a new type of event for us, and also about the sorts of events and topics you'd like to see covered in the future. It's just 3 questions. It should only take a minute or 2 to answer. So hopefully that will appear like magic, as I say, when you leave the webinar this evening, and we'd really appreciate it if you took the time to fill that out. So that's the housekeeping, I think. I think now what I need to do really is hand over to the person we've all come to listen to this evening, and it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome Stella Thebridge to talk to us tonight. She's the history coordinator at Holy Trinity Church. That means she deals with, well, pretty much everything relating to the history of the church. But most recently, she's been a lead on the whole heritage project that's lasted. Well, I'm sure she'll talk a bit more about it in her talk, but one of the key things was the reordering of the church that's been recently completed, and of course a brand new history of the church. As well as being the history coordinator, Stella coordinates the stewards, who play a really crucial role at the church, keeping, at least in pre-COVID times, keeping the church open so that all of us can enjoy the church outside of service time as well. So she does that's a crucial role really for the community here. So Stella, now I'd like to hand over to you, and you have to imagine everyone's applauding and is really pleased that you're here, because I know we all are. Thank you, Stella, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for that very nice introduction. And it's lovely to be here, even though we're not in person, opening this series of talks, and it's really delightful that you managed to create such a varied programme. I'm going to concentrate today on the church building itself, though every aspect of the history of Holy Trinity Parish Church is steeped in the history of the town as a whole. And although there are many people who have been part of its life, from rectors and other clergy to worshipping parishioners, architects, visiting preachers, I'm not going to be able to talk about all of these in the allotted time tonight, so maybe we're going to have another talk at some time in the future. And I also won't really be able to give much time to all the features of the church, like the stained glass and the memorials. So it's very much about the building. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, the work of a few historians who've been invaluable in helping us school information on the history of Holy Trinity, starting with those who wrote parts of the recent history book, and I'll say more about that later. But those people are Marion Baxter, Carol Hoare, Sue Ingley, and Elizabeth Allison. Their names are known to many of you, I know, in different capacities in Sutton. And two people also helped, respectively, with sourcing historical newspaper references and proofreading of our history book. And they are daughter and father, Susie and Tony Walker. I also relied very heavily on the help of Roger Lee, who wrote the foreword to our new history book, and who was always willing and ready to answer inane questions to which I should really have known the answers. Very sadly, Roger died in August, just a few days before the published copies of our book appeared. And just recently, Tony Walker also sadly passed away. Both of these were also respected librarians locally, again, known to many of you, I am sure. So this evening's talk is very much given in their memory, and with grateful thanks to all the people who've helped us along the way. So I'd like to start this evening, as I usually do when we have a group making a physical tour of the church, by showing you the central section. The nave, where the congregation sits, that's this part here, where they sit for church services usually, and the adjoining chancel area, which is this bit here, where the altar is. The chairs face east to the large stained glass window at the end, as shown in this picture. Though sadly, this, which was taken just after our reordering in 2016, is very different from the look at the moment in pandemic conditions, but we hope to revert to it at some point. So currently, this is the look of the church, but the reason I always start people off here is that this central space is where the earliest stone church was built at some time in the 13th century. However, before we even get to the stone building, we need to consider if there was ever an earlier wooden structure. The Chapel of St. Blaise at the Manor House, now in the parish of St. Peter's in Mainey, appeared to serve the needs of Sutton residents in earliest times. Roger Lee brought to our attention a charter of 1204, so right at the very beginning of the 13th century, signed by 3 clergymen of Sutton Coldfield. Now, this number would not have served a small chapel like St. Blaise at the Manor House, so perhaps there was an earlier wooden church in Sutton somewhere, though not necessarily on the current site of Holy Trinity. Yet, of course, if there had been, it would make sense for that spot to be chosen for the stone building. So let us continue with what we think we know, which is that the first stone church, as recorded in the Vatican taxation records of 1290, appeared at some point before that point and was in this space. One of the most thorough chroniclers of our church's history was Norman Granville Evans. He finished a major piece of work in 1987, and as part of that, he made a series of useful outline drawings of the church floor plan and the elevation at various stages of its life. So this one shows the very simple rectangle and square denoting that first church, comprising the nave on the right here for the people, and the chancel is bit where the priest would recite the liturgy. So very much the priest's province, this area here. And this demarcation of the building into these two bits remains the standard in church design right through to the most modern buildings. And it is also a legal responsibility in some churches like Holy Trinity, where the Diocese of Birmingham, on behalf of the clergy, is responsible for the upkeep of this chancel area, and the congregation, via the parochial church council, is responsible for the nave, and of course all the rest of the church that's been subsequently added as at Holy Trinity. Externally, the only stonework from this era which is still visible is as shown here below the east window. So that's the side that we were looking at from the nave through to the end, that window there, and that is on Coleshill Street if you're looking at it from the outside. The dating for this is the stonework below here. There's the bottom of the east window, so it's this bit here. This dating has been confirmed by Mike Hodder, who is well known to many of you too. He's already done a talk for FOLIO and he's doing another one in this series. But amongst his many other pieces of work in the field of archaeology, he's given time to us at Holy Trinity to help us establish some dates and other information about the early building. And we're extremely grateful to him as well. Moving on, we've got an artist's impression that was done as to what the church might have looked like in worship in the medieval period. So here we see again the east window, the chancel area, and then the nave here with all the people in it in their separate parts of the building. There's no seating at this point, and there's a painting on the dividing wall, often called a doom painting, to depict some kind of Bible story, and it was often of the Day of Judgment, just to remind people why they are in church. Now, this lovely picture as a whole was a series of 4 commissioned by an artist called Bob Moulder, and I hope to show you a couple of others as we progress through the centuries tonight. Just to say here that the lack of seating is worth noting. At this time, people would have stood throughout worship, probably coming and going rather than staying for a fixed duration, and that is still the practice in some Christian denominations. Around the edge of the church might have been a ledge where the infirm could actually sit for a while, hence the expression that we still use, the weakest go to the wall. The next major change to the church is in the 15th century, the latter part, and there are 2 things that happened then, not necessarily at the, we don't think they did happen at the same time. One of these was the construction of the church tower. Externally, much as we still see it today, and here is the south side of that, which we don't often look at very closely, and you'll see a little mark there where some stones been put in to cover up what was a doorway at one point, and there's a little window there. That's in the bit that goes, the steps that go up to the tower, go up the tower to the top, and there's a mason's mark here, and various other little bits that might have been altered. But basically the outside hasn't changed much. While the tower is not particularly high at 70 feet, with the church being built on a hill, the site does still impress from the surrounding area and would certainly have sent the right message to the people from the Earl of Warwick. We still have good views from the top, and there is actually now a film to view on our website of a tour up the tower, especially as it's not yet possible to return to our physical tours up inside. Inside, the tower has undergone many changes. Here on the right, we see the latest look, still with the west door entrance there, though that has not been there in every century. And of course, brides still enter that door at their wedding, and the couple go out again through it at the end. Our font that you can see just in the front there of that tower space, it now creates a baptistry area on the tower floor, which is itself raised from the nave, so it gives a good view for the congregation as well as the family when there's a baptism. The font is certainly Norman in its decoration and maybe of stone from the Saxon era, and that came from another church in North Warwickshire in 1856. And you can read the lovely story of how it came to be in Holy Trinity on the website, in the book, etc. I've wanted to introduce you to this photo on the left because this was taken in 2018 when we were partway through the reordering of the church, because again it now looks as it does on the right. But this is showing you what happened when we removed the organ pipes that used to be in here, and this floor is still in at this point, but has since been removed, and the pipes were obscuring this window in the west end, and also the ceiling, which you can hardly see there, but it looks much brighter on the right hand picture there. And again, you can see the font at the bottom. So that was just to give you an idea of how the levels, you know, they've changed many times over the century inside, even though the external tower has not changed very much at all. The other feature that I mentioned, so there were two things that happened at this period in the late 15th century. The other one was the first building of aisles to the south and the north, either side of the nave. They didn't extend as far as the chancel, they only extended to this part here. And this is the very famous south view of the church that you'll recognise. But it's very useful to look here, because this little bit of wall here is actually part of that original medieval 15th century extension. And this little line at the top here is what they call stringing, which is the line of brickwork at the top of the wall as it would have been then. So I think that's rather nice, that's still there. And it leads us into the next phase of building, which is the extensions here along either side, right up to that east end wall that we saw earlier in the pictures. Sorry, I'm going to find my place again. Yes, so those changes, these extensions here are what actually John Vesey achieved for the church, amongst many other things for the church and the town. His name, of course, will be very familiar to most of you if you have any connection with Sutton at all. I haven't got time to go into all the wonderful things he did, but in terms of the church, he gave an organ, apparently, and 4 bells from Hanwell Priory, which of course had been dissolved by his friend Henry VIII, and as well as the extension of these aisles. Some historians say that he built whole aisles. We don't think he did now. We think these bits were first with this, as this shows, and then these were added in Bishop Lees's times, and they were just extensions. They weren't separate chapels as they are at the moment. And you'll see this crenellation, which then goes on at that point above the wall. The next picture is a lovely view from a postcard, I think possibly about 1910, something like that. But this shows you more clearly than the previous one now how these extensions come right to this east end wall. So here's the south aisle and the north aisle, that side. I'm just going to show you a couple of things here too, because this little doorway I'm going to talk about later briefly. There was one either side. You can't see the one that side, but this one was still in use much later than the other one. And then also at this point you can still see the gravestones around the church. They were removed in 1950, and you've also got a much earlier bit of wall here. Moving on, we get to the inside of those aisles. There were actually galleries put in at that point as well into these bits, again, just as far as the end of the nave. And the other legacy of Vesey is the oak door here on the left, not the ones ahead of you. They're 1980s, I think. But this was the original sort of, well, not original, but the oak door that shut into that main door on the south side. So that's in that porch that's on the south side, and it's a really fine oak door, which is obviously there, and you can see it. I'm sorry I haven't got a better picture of it. I have got one somewhere, but I could not find it at any point. So at some point between now, where we are at the beginning of the 16th century and the 18th century, probably some seating was installed inside, possibly benches, but there's no record of what this was like or how much of the church had seating areas. Weddings would have been taking place in church later on. In medieval times, they were just conducted at the door or the porch of the church. And following Henry VIII's break with Rome, especially during the reign of Edward VI, much was changed in terms of the layout of features internally, like the altar, the communion table, the removal of images, which were then thought to be inappropriate, if not idolatrous, and very often royal coats of arms appearing instead to show that the king was now, or the queen was now, the head of the church in England. And we still have two of these sets of coats of arms on display inside the church. Moving to the Civil War and the ensuing Commonwealth and Protectorate, Sutton actually supported the parliamentarians, unlike neighbouring Lichfield, which had royalist sympathies. There was no damage to Sutton, to Holy Trinity Church at all in that period, but equally it was not a time for much change to the building either. People were doing other things in those days. The 18th century, however, saw what was described as the re-pewing, so there must have been some earlier pews put in, from 1740 to 1760, and it was quite a major piece of work. Foundations collapsed in the nave at one point, and the pillars which we now see there were rebuilt at that point. A lot of that was a feature of the sandstone on which the church is built. A large number of oak trees was felled in Sutton Park to enable all this to happen. And this picture shows you those box pews as they were installed into that south gallery. And of course, you can still see those when you go in there. The pews were about, I think it was 146 in total through the church, and we now have these 11 remaining in this gallery. And you can just see, I hope my pointer is showing here, that the numbers on some of them are still there. And the pews were all allocated to residences, to places, not to families as such, but to household houses themselves. And when they were reallocated after this, there was a lot of contention. And Janet Jordan, who's a very useful local historian, did some research on that for us. Fascinating story about how people complained in Lichfield. At the same time as these pews were put in, we had the pulpit. A clock was installed on the external tower wall, and a new organ was also provided at that point. The pulpit is worth another quick look. It will be familiar to many of you. It's still there. But I like this picture which I think maybe from about 1929, when there was a big redecoration of the church, because we've got this wonderful wallpaper or something in the Vesey Chapel at that point. But this is very much as it looks today again, but with the reordering, we've moved the steps around that side, and we've got more space now in this area here. But I wanted to just show you the picture on the right, because it is the underside of the tester, the roof of the pulpit, and it's such lovely marquetry. It's rather worth a look, I think. Further galleries were built at this time by prestigious local families, notably the Four Oaks Gallery from Four Oaks Hall, which was right in front of the upper tower area, so that it looked directly down the length of the nave and chancel, thus giving Simon Luttrell and his family the most commanding view of proceedings. It also meant their entrance, often after the service had started on a Sunday, could be as dramatic as possible, causing the priest to pause if they did arrive late. The tower also housed a gallery at this time for the church choir, as was common at this period to sing from the west end of the church by the organ. Bells were introduced, further bells. We had 6 during the 18th century. And the next slide is now an artist's impression of the chancel at this time. It's another of Bob's pictures. And it looks like we've moved on a long way to 1850, but really this is how it looked from that moment until the next big change, which was the end of the 19th century. So here we've got these, it's purely imagined, but using some photos this time of the very early photos and drawings and so on. And what Bob has recreated is how the box pews might have looked. At this point, the chancel was level with the nave, so that the floor, and there were burials in the chancel of the clergy, and so there's no steps or anything, and so the pews just run straight up as far as the end, if you like. And notice the pulpit is here at this point, and this is the Queen Anne reredos, the backdrop to the altar, which went at some point to, I think probably in 1879, to the Masonic Hall apparently, but no one's ever found it recently. We don't quite know what happened to that. You'll notice there's no stained glass in the window here in the east end, nor in any part of the church, until there was one little tiny bit of decorative stained glass, but none of the windows were until 1860s. But what I want to show you here is these galleries, because as we move towards the I've done my old trick of just yakking and then not following my script, so I've just got to find where I've got to. Do apologize. Yes, so these two galleries, there's one on the north side here and on the south side here. They were actually only in place from 1828 to 1860, and they housed pupils from town school, which had been built in 1825, so for elementary education. And obviously it was felt important they should come to worship, but not mix with everyone else. So they had their own little galleries on the end of these built on the end of the main ones in the north and south aisle, and they came in through the two little doors either side of the east window, which is the door I showed you in that earlier picture. One of those is still just about visible there, and internally you can see the other one in the Vesey Chapel. And they had a spiral staircase going up to there a little bit, and then they were curtained off from the rest of the congregation. The 19th century saw other huge changes again to the church, and obviously the main one I'm going to talk about in a minute is the building of the north aisle and the gallery in 1879. But some other works had taken place a little bit earlier. The roof of the nave was raised in 1863, and the current clergy vestry to the north of the Vesey Chapel, so that's over on this side here now, was built in 1874. The new north aisle also gave opportunity for other changes internally, some of which were quite radical. And as I say, the chancel floor was raised in 1875, which obviously allowed for better visibility of proceedings by the congregation. It did create steps from the nave, and of course it covered the burial sites of especially of clergy who traditionally been buried in that area. Some memorial plaques were moved to the chancel walls up here, and they're there today, but it may be that some were lost at this point. And this next slide shows you the chancel, the plans that Norman Evans did for these later periods. This first one on the left, I apologise, it's a bit fuzzy. This basically is how it was left after Vesey's extension to the aisles down here. So what we've got is that the tower here, and then the north aisle, now called the Vesey aisle, and the south aisle, the original north and south aisles. And then so it's just a much bigger sort of rectangle flush with the east end wall here. But what you notice is that the roof is the original roof on the nave. When we get to this next one in 1874, so it's before the big extension, we have now got the roof raised here, and you'll see on the level of my mouse is playing up for me. The roof has come up a higher level than it was on the previous picture. And then we've also got here this extra square here, which is the new clergy vestry and the little sort of wall there. So that's just to give us sort of some idea of how things were progressing. But before we get to that north aisle extension, I want to show you this picture, which is the only one I can find of the original north wall. So Norman Evans drew this from a photograph, I think, but I haven't been told where that original photograph is. So if anybody knows, I'd love to see it at some point. He did extremely good drawings of this kind. But the lovely thing about it for me is that when you look at this, there's that medieval stringing that we saw on the south side, now on the north side as well. So clearly, you know, matching what we know now of the medieval work. And then obviously this would be the new clergy vestry at this point. So as he says, this was 1878, the year before, well, just before they started all the building of the north aisle. And there was this little ranger's door, as he calls it, which had been added in at some point to make an entrance on that side to go into the north side of the church. This little picture, which you can't see very clearly here, but it's it's at the same time and the same look, if you like, but just from the tower, so you can still see the old north aisle here and the north wall, and you can also see the gravestones at the front and some railings and so on. So I just thought that was worth a little look there. So we finally come to this enormous extension that was done in 1879, which was a new aisle, the north aisle, and the gallery that it also contained. So quite a high roof on that as well. And it meant that the previous north aisle was renamed, or is now called, the Vesey aisle, and ends with the chapel at the end where Vesey is buried. So the tomb is still in that Vesey aisle. If we just compare these two pictures, this is the snowy one I showed you at the beginning, and it's the church in the snow before the reordering. So you can see quite clearly the Vesey, what is now the Vesey aisle, was the north side, and the new north extension, which is quite a bit sort of bigger. And then you've got the south side still with the original wall there. And this little bit in the front here is the choir vestry that was built in 1901, I think it was, certainly early in the 20th century. And it's very important because it was designed by Bidlake, who was a very famous Birmingham architect. And when we reordered the church, we were asked, and we did, maintain that front, so that has not been in any way altered. It's been altered inside considerably. And then when we get to the pictures of the new church, you'll see that's where the entrance is now. So I just want to give you a feel of how those have changed. If we go to the north aisle as it was before reordering, and this will be what is familiar to a lot of you if you did come into the church much before 2016, because this was the look from 1879 right through to 2016, and these pews were put in at that point throughout the church. And this is, you can see it's got quite a low ceiling because we've got the gallery above, and then here is the doorway into that choir vestry built by Bidlake that we saw the front of a moment ago. And then all these plaques on the wall, these memorials, came actually off the original north wall here, the inside there, and a lot of them were put there at that point. Some were put on this wall behind us, as it were. But it's just a useful reminder of what the look was like then. And on the right here, I've got a picture of the Ray Nadin Memorial, which always sat on the front pew, and the mayor, if the mayor was in attendance, he or she would sit in that pew, and we've preserved that's its current position in the southwest corner. We've got a couple of these preserved there so that we haven't lost a copy of them, if you like. The most significant addition at this point, and one of the reasons I think why they did this great work, apart from extending because the population was increasing, but it was to do with some woodwork that was acquired from Worcester Cathedral at a price of £100 by the Reverend William Kirkpatrick Ryan and Bedford. He was the last of a long line of clergy of that name, and the penultimate, and he was very well known because he also did a whole load of other stuff in the town, and he also wrote a history and wrote about the church, so he was very influential. And this woodwork was added both to the area housing Bishop Vesey's tomb, now the Vesey Chapel, and also the chancel, where new stalls were created for the choir. So this moved them down from that west gallery to the prominent position in line with the practicing cathedrals. Everybody was putting the choir at the front of the church now. And there were also stalls either side of the chancel, nearest the congregation, for the clergy. Screens were made between the chancel and the aisle sides. Some of the wood and also pieces from St Michael's Coventry, which was subsequently the first Coventry Cathedral, were used for the inner doors at the west end of the church. We've seen them in a previous picture, and you'll see them again under the tower. Now, excitingly, we have learned in recent years that much of the woodwork is extremely rare, if not actually unique, and to be cherished, in fact, as it is not Jacobean as thought, but dates from the much earlier short reign of Henry VIII's daughter, Mary I, Mary Tudor, who reigned from 1553 to 58. So she gave this woodwork to Worcester Cathedral blue, but it's basically a black and white picture, and I'm rather fond of it because I think it's so clear. It was taken for a guidebook of 1970 by Dennis Constantine, and I think the black and white just shows you some of the detail of the decoration and so on. So here again you can see the choir stalls, the clergy stalls at the front. This is the pulpit steps going up here, of course, and these are the sort of dividing screens to make the chancel area a bit more closed again, and the chapels either side. And then at the back here we've actually got this might have gone in at this point, was the I think it was 1929, the backdrop to the altar, which came out in the 90s when the altar was moved forward. It does actually block the window a bit, or did in those days. So I just thought that was a useful way of seeing some of that beautiful woodwork. As I said, stained glass windows were only added from the 1860s, but we have a massive number of those, and you can read all about those on the website, and do come and visit when we can do that again. In the 20th century, the ceilings were painted in their very ornate style. The second part of this in 1929, when the Vesey Chapel was also created through the construction of a screen and gates to enclose it, and an altar was added in there. I'm now going to move you to another of Bob Moulder's impressions, if you like, of what the church looked like. And of course, this is within living memory for a lot of people. This is meant to be around 1950. So the clergyman at the front could be the rector of the time, John Boggun, and the choir's in place now in their stalls, and there would be the curate on the left-hand side there, the pulpit again, and here you can see the backdrop in colour now to the altar, and of course the stained glass in both the Vesey Chapel and the East End very clearly there, and this then shows you again the Reign Aid in Memoriam in its proper place on the pew there. It also this makes good comparison with the next picture, which is looking at a similar period. It was actually taken in the 1980s, but nothing had changed very much at that point in the other area. And this next picture shows you the other way round, if you like, so looking back to the tower along the nave, and there are those organ pipes in the tower area at that point, and again those porch doors underneath, which have the wood from as well as Worcester. And then the other interesting feature to show you here is this wonderful spiral staircase, which was the way you got up into the North Gallery. And of course the North Gallery is actually along the North Aisle beside us in this picture. You can't see that, but it extended across the Vesey aisle and the west end of that. And then you came down the steps here and onto the tower floor there, and down more steps again to get to the foot. So what we did with the reordering was that we did remove the bit of West End gallery, so that we could have the new entrance looking right through the church. And then this lovely spiral staircase was preserved and put in the middle of that gallery, of the North Gallery as it remains on the north side. And it really has become a lovely feature of the church, which if you haven't been, do come and have a look when you can. I wanted to, before we leave sort of 1950s, as it were, we've just got to with Bob's picture, I wanted to show you this one. This is a lovely aerial view from the 1950s. I think it might be the 1960s, but I think it's more likely to be the 50s. And Marion Baxter very kindly sourced this for me at one point. But I hope it helps to put the church in context sort of geographically, because obviously there it is with the south side very prominent, and the north just here in shade. But it shows you the Masonic Hall here, which at one point was the town hall. We've got the building at the foot here, which is now Sutton Coldfield Baptist Church, but was town school originally. And coming up here, Coastal Street still right along there, Rectory Road, and then Trinity Hill up the side. And of course you can see the supporting wall for the hill just there and here, and a lovely empty, I don't even know if it was a public car park, but empty there. And of course we know it's certainly after 1950, because the gravestones have been moved. There's the Vesey Gardens. It's all looking quite bare. It's obviously winter time, but I thought that was rather a nice way of just putting the building in its context. And that then brings us to the church today. And I wanted to just show you now, there's the external look, if you like, with the new entrance. So there's Bidlake's bit still there, North Gallery, Vesey Aisle, and the tower, of course. It does have both new external doors, wooden ones, and then internal glass doors now. And what we try and do is, when the church is open, is always to have those outer doors open so that you can see right through to the east end window. And it is a lovely prospect, shall we say. And then these are this is the entrance you go in, and then these are the inner glass doors when there's a lovely open sort of porch area. And then you get to these glass doors here, and you can just about see the Vesey window at the end there. So it gives you a nice look all the way down that aisle. And I just threw this one in because I think it shows how we've used the church already. This was for a barn dance, and it was a wonderful area for that. Cleared all the chairs away, had tables around in the south and Vesey aisles, and then we still had plenty of room to dance in the middle. We've got a new floor as part of the reordering. That's all new stone with underfloor heating. The whole entrance is accessible and so on. So and the lighting is also much better. So you can really see all the features of the church very much more clearly. So it's making the space, we hope, very helpful for the 21st century, for not just the church congregation, but the wider community. As Holy Trinity has always tried to be at the heart of the community. Very sadly, at the moment, we're a bit constrained in those matters. I just wanted to go into some of the sort of history side of this, because opening up following the reordering, we wanted to be able to open it so that people could come in either for private prayer or to look around, and we had this scheme to have stewards opening it up, and we'll be renewing that as soon as we possibly can. And we also created a very nice website, which we could not have done without funding we had from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and it also enabled us to do all the recent historical research, which has given us some new resources. So I just wanted to show you some of the old church guidebooks. I mean, obviously we're mentioning a lot of big history books like Dugdale's Antiquities of Warwickshire and the Pevsner Guide to Warwickshire of the 60s. But these have come at different points. That one, I think the earliest one, probably the very beginning of the 20th century. This is I think 1960s. And then this is the 1971 I mentioned, where I showed you the black and white picture, the Dennis Constantine pictures. They're beautiful pictures, but I think they show very much the period, don't they, that they were produced. And then this, this one down here was done for it just says at the bottom, the Scout Jamboree in 1957. There was thought good opportunity to promote the history of Sutton, and the church had its own little leaflet. And then this was one that was done, notes on the windows and library. That's the library in the South Chapel that was done in the 60s. This is the original 1987 guidebook that was really the definitive one. And was produced very heavily from Norman Evans's writings, and Margaret Gardner, who was the archivist at the church, she did a huge amount to get that into print, if you like, and she used to write regularly about the church afterwards. But a lot of people in the church community actually got that to happen and got it published, and also took the photos. It's a really lovely colour book. And then this was a revised version when the Trinity Centre was built in 1996. So those are sort of earlier guidebooks. And I just wanted to acknowledge really some of the people who have helped us to get to the point where we've now got new resources, because I've mentioned the people who helped writing history book, but other people have helped with other materials as well, and have written as part of the local history research group with Roger, and some of those names are up there as well. So I just wanted to sort of record some of those, because I don't want anyone to feel left out. This is very much a collaborative work that we've produced lately, and what has come out of, if you like, the Heritage Lottery grant and all the history work that we've done as a result of it is two things, because we felt that the previous guidebook, we couldn't make it either a guidebook or a history book. We needed to do different things, really. So what we now have is this new church guide, and I might be able to show you. There we are. That's the real McCoy, and it does open up at the back to reveal a plan as you go round. So you've got a lovely colour plan, and that is available to buy, you know, at any point. And we've also then got this history book, which was published this year by the History Press, and it's a much fuller story. It builds very heavily on Norman's original work, but we've also on a lot of research since then. So those are the two new things we have done. And other sources of information are, of course, our website, where we've put a lot of the history onto the heritage pages. This is a screenshot from a sort of help guide that you can use on the site to help you navigate those pages. So we've got a lot around, and it's all in bite-sized chunks around the buildings, the features, the people, and so on, and related buildings. And of course, we also put into that the history of all the churches that have been built since, because, you know, Holy Trinity was the church, but, you know, for quite a long time. But obviously, in the 19th century, everything sort of blossomed, really, and you know, that we've got a lovely lot of churches across the area now. And I've just thrown in for fun when we put the signs up when we're open, you know, the church open sessions. If anyone is interested in becoming a steward to help us when we do open up again, we'd love to hear from you. We've got stewards who are members of the church and many who are not, because it's people who just want to help us keep the place open, really. But you do have to follow a sort of application process. So that's there's information about that on the website. And of course, there's you know, I'm very happy to be contacted about any of this by any of you. And my final slide should be those contact details. So there's the church since the reordering in the snow, as we saw at the beginning, website, and my email. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stella. I'm sure lots of people are nodding in their comfy chairs around Sutton and maybe beyond, because it's been a fascinating talk. And I would just like to really encourage as many of you who are watching this evening or listening to the talk to seek out the book. It's Stella hasn't paid me to say this, but it is a brilliant read. Not only does it go into really good detail about the history of the church, but about so much of Sutton's life, because so many people who were involved with the church were key people in Sutton. So even if you think, oh, you might not be particularly interested in the church, although presumably you are because you're here tonight, actually there's loads in there about all sorts of characters from Sutton's past. So I would really heartily recommend you try and get hold of a copy of the book, and probably the easiest way is to drop Stella an email on that email address that's there.
Yes, I'll let you have a bit of a discount if you've been to the talk tonight.
So there's an incentive. Drop her an email, tell her you were at the talk.
Encourages you, because we've got copies to sell, and then the money goes to the church. So
fantastic.
Yeah,
I should also say there are a couple of copies available through the library service, of course, although at the moment, because everything's closed, that you'll have to wait a little longer before you can access the library copies. I also just wanted to again push the church's website, because the heritage pages there are brilliant. And if you've not had the chance to go up the tower, please seek out the video of it, because I've been fortunate. I have been up the tower, and it's probably the single best thing I have ever done in Sutton. It gives you such a different perspective of the town, and it's so fun going up the tower. So when the church is open and you're able to do it, please go and do it. But in the meantime, go and find the video. And please if you've got any questions, now's the time to start typing them. I see we've got a few come in. There was a question I was going to put out to the audience, just to reiterate. There are a couple of puzzles there that Stella's put out to us this evening about things that have gone missing, or that she's trying to track down, that maybe you can help with. So if you know anything about the Queen Anne Reredos that went to the Masonic buildings, please let her know. I'm sure she'd love to crack that puzzle. And also she mentioned that beautiful drawing by Norman Evans of a photo, and if you know anything about the original of that, I think, wouldn't it be great if one of the things that came out of this evening was solving some of these puzzles? So I'm a great believer in the hive mind. So audience, that's your challenge. Now I'm going to go over to some of the questions, Stella.
Okay.
I'll just briefly mention, Jean and Robert, you've started questions, but they haven't actually come through. You've just said hello or hi, Stella. So please retype your questions if you're still here, Jean and Robert. But the first question comes from Malcolm, and he says, "Thank you, Stella. It's a fascinating talk. I live in the old curate's house on Trinity Hill. I believe that the main part of my house was built in the early 19th century, but know little else about it. Do you know much about the history of the house, and could you share it with us, please?"
Oh gosh, that's put me on the spot, hasn't it? I mean, it was in the church's possession only relatively recently, I think. It was just a little cottage at the top of the hill, I think. I don't think it was particularly going to be used as a clergy house originally. So we do have some information, and I think there may be a little bit on the website, but I can easily send you something if you want to just pop your email through. I think we met once on an open day, Malcolm, when I think you popped in once to look at the church when you moved in. Do drop me your email, and then I can sort of get back to you on that as well, and I'll try and put something on the website about it too.
That would be brilliant. Thank you, Stella. Now Richard's got a great question. There's always lots of excitement in any forum about Sutton's history about underground spaces or underground tunnels, or so does the church have any underground spaces that you're willing to tell us about?
There's no tunnels, sadly. Lots of people have tried to look over there's always these talk of tunnels up to the 3 tons and that sort of thing, but we don't think there are. There is what's known as the dungeon, the door off Cozel Street, and the latest research on that, which again was done by Janet Jordan and Roger and Eileen Donahoe, was to go in and look when the door was bashed in at one point, and that we know was they think it was probably a malt house. There were 2 pubs on the hill until the Vesey Gardens were built, so it's highly likely that that's what it was for. And we know that the area was used during the war by the RAF for sort of like a sort of mess area, but the church itself underneath doesn't really have vaults in that way. There are burial bits, and we have exposed them, and of course when we were reordering we did expose them, and there are photographs of those, and there is a photograph in the history book of one of the vaults. But there's no actual tunnels, I'm afraid, as far as I can tell.
I don't know that I want to believe that, Stella.
I know. Maybe there's something that's been missed.
You mentioned the research on the space under the Vesey Gardens. There has been written up, and there's a brilliant extended
very good report.
Report on the Sutton Coldfield Local History Research Group website. I'll try to make sure that that's shared with everybody who's attended.
Yes, please do, because that's a fantastic resource as well. And something just came up the other day about the medieval road in the park. Somebody had done a few pages on that. Very, very interesting. There's so much people are just beavering away, and it's so lovely we can share it so easily these days. So yeah, do look at that.
Somebody's noticed that we're recording this evening's session. We're not quite sure whether we're going to make the recording available afterwards. We'll just have to look at the quality of it and discuss that with Stella afterwards. If it will be made available, I'll certainly contact you to let you know. But at the moment, it's sort of a backup and exploring the possibilities for us from a technical point of view. Now, Keith has a question. What was the reason for the increase in congregations which led to the periodic reorganising of the church interior? And I'm very excited because Keith is here from Cornwall.
Oh wow! Hello, Keith. Well, it was always population increase, and certainly once Vesey had started improving things when he came back to Sutton in 1523, I think it was, then there was more movement of population to Sutton because there was actually some work and so on. So that would have been the first one, and then again in the 18th century it was becoming much bigger. And of course the big one, 1879, was because of the coming of the railway in 1860. 61 or something like that. So that when the railway line was built, obviously huge increase in population. But of course, at the same time, they finally saw some sense and put churches in other parts of Sutton, because it's a bit stupid to expect everybody to be coming to one church. So 1835, St James Hill, which had always been a chapel of ease, as they used to call it, that was the first one to be a separate parish. And then, of course, there were the churches at Warmley and at St Michael's Boldmere. And then we get Mainey in the 20th century, and Emmanuel and St Columba's, and then of course All Saints, Four Oaks grew out of St James Hill. So that made much more sense. We do have in the book, again, I've put in something about the plans that I found in Birmingham archives in the library there, of an extension on the east side that was mooted in 1891. This was presumably a parting shot of William Kirkpatrick, Ryland Bedford. Mercifully, it wasn't executed. That's what it says, not executed. And I think that was a very wise decision, because it would have made the church even bigger, even darker. And, it wasn't necessary, because, it was huge already. And all it would have, and there was no point. We had these other churches where they were needed. We didn't want to traipse 3 miles to church every Sunday. So it made much more sense not to do that one. But thank you. Yeah, it's a good point.
Thank you. And Keith has asked me to thank you. Thanks, Keith. Malcolm, just so that you know, I'll make sure that Stella gets your email. I can see that that's popped up, so we'll enable that. Now, I haven't got any more questions that have come through this evening, so just last chance to submit a question. Although, of course, as Stella said, she's very happy to answer questions if you go away and things pop up. You can see her email address there, and if you haven't made a note of it this evening, you can always go via the Holy Trinity's website, which you can find if you just Google Holy Trinity Sutton Coldfield. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us this evening. Thank you very much to my lovely assistant Liz in the background, who none of you have seen, but who's been very helpful. And I think all of us would like to sincerely thank Stella for her time and her knowledge and her passion. It's been a really fascinating talk, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here this evening who can't wait to get out of the house and go and visit the church. Thank you very much, everybody. As I say, please, when you leave promptly now, and if hopefully the quick questionnaire survey about feedback from tonight will pop up. But yeah, thank you very much, and I hope you all stay safe and stay well. Good night. Goodbye.